Hi everyone, shorter video today about comparable titles. It's a necessary part of your book proposal, not just for this class, but if you really want to publish a nonfiction book, you have to have a list of every agent, every publisher will ask for that as a section of your book proposal. Comparable titles means just comparing, right? Comparative, comparable titles. So if we're using this example of like you're writing a history of the Romanian violin luthiers, violin makers in the 20th century, mid 20th century, will be super specific. Are there other books about that subject? List it in your comparable titles. It's a serious analysis of, you know, so maybe yes, there was one other book somebody wrote about mid 20th century Romanian violin luthiers, but it was only published in Romanian. It was never translated into English for a global audience. So that's the difference of your book. Your book is going to be written in English and written for a global audience, and that's different. That's a differentiating factor. It won't always be that clear. Maybe there was already one book written about mid 20th century Romanian violin luthiers, but maybe it had a shortcoming. Maybe it's outdated by 20 years. Maybe there's been new research, new histories, new developments in the world. And so you'll have to make the case that, right, my book is better. My book adds something to the conversation. My book adds something to the conversation. So then what? There's only one other book that's super comparable. You might have to zoom out a little bit. Well, then there's also, a widely read book about the history of the violin. And that's a popular book, but it doesn't really go into great detail about the Eastern European violin makers. And so that's where you're going to articulate my book adds something to the conversation, something important to the conversation. And then the list goes on. Maybe there's a comparable history of Romanian music, and that's a comparable title. And it talks a little bit about fiddles and violin making, but not a lot. And so, again, your book is adding something. It's comparable to, but it's adding something or different from that book. And then you could zoom out even further, like what are the most popular, is it similar to some other history or history of music or something like that. And so you're kind of scanning and researching the field and the marketplace of books to see what else has already been done and where does your book fit in. How is it similar to? How is it different from? And you should be like kind of respectful in this section. You see in my examples, you want to call out the shortcomings of, but you also want to appreciate what those other books have done well and put your book into conversation with those other books. Say you're writing a book about Stoicism and the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. That's been pretty well covered already. So you'll have to get into some really specifics of like, maybe it's for a general audience, so it's comparable to, say you were writing about Xenophon specifically and Socrates. It's like that's already been covered from an academic angle. It's already been covered from a pop philosophy angle. Writers like Ryan Holiday, they do that stuff, but maybe not specifically incorporating the research, the most recent translations of Xenophon. And so I know that sounds kind of wild, but you might have to get to that level of specificity of like really looking at what other people are publishing, and drawing some comparisons and contrasts. And then doesn't that also, it's fun because it informs your writing. And it's also like, it's amazing sometimes because you're like, you'll have a really great idea for a book and then you'll find out, oh my gosh, someone's already done that. someone has already done this really really specific thing. It's like a lot of times, yeah, that happened to me the other day. I was like, oh, my grandparents, uh, my maternal grandfather was on Tinian Island during World War II, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool to do a family history and like the history of that specific island during World War II. What happened on Tinian Island? Some really important things happened. Important enough that someone else has already written multiple books about the role of Tinian Island in World War II. And to me, that was a great relief because I was like, oh, good, because, some, somebody already covered that, and I'm getting older and I don't have all the time in the world and I'm writing about other things. So somebody got that already. They already covered Tinian Island. But if you were doing comparable title lists, you'd have to look at like, okay, what am I offering that's different from what already exists? And also, it's a way of demonstrating that your book might have a broad appeal. It's kind of like, look, people are writing about this subject, people are reading about this subject, people are, publishers are selling books about this subject. So you can think of it from that angle too. It's like there's a marketing kind of angle of like, look, there's a conversation happening already in the space, and here's where my book fits in. And this is also demonstration that there was a can you find a bestseller or a really popular book to add to that list to show that your book has mass appeal and the potential for sales and the potential for a wide audience? That's probably a good idea to find something with a comparable title with a really broad appeal to demonstrate that your book may also have a broad, wide appeal to a big audience. So there's just some ideas about comparable titles list for you, and check out the examples in Canvas and have fun researching. Practically, I mean, you can even do kind of like Amazon searches, library database searches, see what's out there. Look through bestseller lists, lots of different approaches in terms of searching around for what books have already been written about your subject. Take care.